Guy McPherson here again with Neil Shepard, and we're going deep again. We're going to add on to last week's conversation by talking further about our energy system, and we're going to go a little bit more broadly this time around. So, Neil, you want to kick us off?
Sure. This time we're going to talk about these goals of zero emissions, net zero, carbon capture, keeping us under 2 degrees Celsius. They're all in quotation marks. And we're going to just look at how reachable these are given how we seem to be proceeding. So let's quickly go as to the case that most scientists who are honest look at the previous data that we've just said and said we must do everything we can to reduce our emissions. That means reduce our use of fossil fuels as fast as possible. And so you can find hundreds, if not thousands, of charts over the last 20 years showing deadlines and dates by which we must, without fail, reduce our use of fossil fuels and our emissions. Such things as carbon budgets. People have handily calculated using some model how much petroleum and fossil fuels we can burn before we use up the budget. That is, before we have emitted enough that will definitely take us past 2 degrees or whatever. That is what these carbon budgets are. So there is not one carbon budget. There are multiple carbon budgets from different environmental groups and sources that are based on different calculations. So you have to know what carbon budget you're talking about. The IPCC has a carbon budget, but there's 5 or 6 others that are all different in terms of the way they're compiled and what they think we can spend. But the basic question to ask when you hear the phrase carbon budget is to ask, what have we done with every budget that we've ever had in the United States? And what do most industrial countries do with every budget they ever have? They blow past it. They completely blow it up. So just bear that in mind as you use this vaunted phrase, carbon budget. And so let's look at this. This is from the BP, British Petroleum Energy Outlook 2024 edition. The pathway along which the global energy system is currently traveling, if continued, is not consistent with a 2 degrees Celsius carbon budget. So here you see that we have the actuals, where my arrow is, the actuals gigatons of emissions of CO2. And then, as always in these charts, the projected. And I never understand why they think the current trajectory without draconian cuts is going to somehow decline, but that's often represented. I really don't know where the model says we're going to use less if we just do nothing. But the desire of the well-intentioned environmentalists, notice this blue curve is labeled net zero. So to achieve net zero, it's 2024. You can just see we should already be dropping our emissions on a slope that is so much faster than how we got here, Guy. What are your thoughts on this?
It's never going to happen. In addition, as with almost everybody, whoever is drawing these graphs is ignoring the aerosol masking effect.
They won't acknowledge that it even exists, most of them, or that
Exactly.
it has a significant enough effect.
That's exactly right. And it's hugely important. If we abruptly reduce industrial activity, that's among the fastest paths to extinction of all life on Earth, is to make that kind of abrupt change. So net zero sooner than they're indicating here, that's a really good way to cause the loss of all life on Earth, and I'm not really a fan.
The belief is that if we could snap our fingers tomorrow and stop emitting all fossil fuels, the temperature would immediately start declining. And there is a whole shit sandwich of reasons why that isn't true. But one of them is the aerosol masking effect, which is our activities, our industrial emissions, including many parts of the fossil fuel emissions bulk, is actually serving to cool the planet. Some of it is serving to heat the planet, but the two together, if you eliminate it, the cooling effect goes away. Is this what I understand?
Yes, absolutely. And James E. Hansen has indicated that the aerosols fall out of the atmosphere in about 5 days. And so this is sometimes considered the founder of climate science, James Hansen, and he is indicating that when we reduce or eliminate industrial activity, one result will be the loss of aerosols from the atmosphere and therefore a very rapid heating. He calls it our Faustian bargain.
Right. So what we see here again, this 2 degrees Celsius carbon budget phrase is from the IPCC. The current trajectory, it's very funny because the current trajectory in this chart shows that it will increase, whereas in the chart on the very left, it's somehow saying that it will decrease. So there is something here that there's an optimism built in here, to at least to the chart on the left, that I don't understand. I'm sure there's some very intelligent answer as to how it's going to decrease all of its own. This is another round of these charts from the BP Energy Outlook 2024. You're getting as latest off the presses that we can find here at Nature Bats Last. Again, here on the right, you've got carbon budget, the current trajectory, the net zero goal, the delayed net zero goal, and something called the fastest IPCC decarbonization. All of these are meant to encourage us to go for the most draconian programs and cuts that would achieve the best line or the best outcome or the fastest reduction here. Again, on the left, you see the same thing. There's all these competing programs of cuts that will produce these amazing declines by 2050. Whereas if we do nothing, apparently it'll decline on this green line. Guy, am I wrong to be suspicious? I mean, why would they think it's going to decline like this between now and 2050? That's just 25 years.
Maybe somebody is factoring in the decline of the human population as a result of World War.
Right.
I can't imagine what else would cause that
Maybe our
decline.
population will peak, and people are already showing some signs that they're not able to reproduce because we put in so many pollutants that maybe fertility is being affected. People's motivation to follow the script of wife and kids or husband and kids and the picket fence, that was always unsustainable, and its very unsustainability is finally breaking through people's thick skulls so that they're stopping having babies. So maybe that's good.
Right. And I suspect it's a combination of the two you mentioned. There are environmental factors that are reducing the ability of sperm to be viable. And at the same time, people are realizing that maybe it's not such a good idea to have 16 or 18 children in the family.
Or even one or two.
Right.
If you didn't trust the BP people, then look at the climateactiontracker.org. And it gets quite complicated. I mean, they create these communications tools, I guess, on the belief that once we look at them, it will become clear to us what we have to do. I mean, it's exceedingly hard to read this thing, but I will just try and interpret it. If you look at this chart, it says we are here. 1.3 degrees warming in 2023. That's their claim, that we're only at 1.3, that there's a Paris Agreement to limit us to 1.5. So that is the green showing there. Oh, and look, it's green. So I guess since it's green at this part of the thermometer, if it's all green, it's all still good. So if we stay at just 1.5 or less, it's all green. I guess that's what that means, right, Guy? And then it looks like policies and action is just real world action based on current policies with no change. Then you've got 2030 target, which might keep it to 2.5. And you've got pledges and targets that will keep it to 2.1. And then you've got, quote unquote, the optimistic scenario. Best case scenario assumes full implementation of all announced targets, including net zero targets, LTSs and NDCs. NDCs are nationally denominated commitments that, of course, very few countries are seriously trying this. And all of this is meant to give us some sort of tool to see how we can reach one of these goals. What do you make of this, Guy? Is this easy to read? Is this causing you to have any confidence that we're going to get this done?
Oh, no. And again, people are just so far behind the curve. I'm not a climate scientist. I've never claimed to be a climate scientist. Why is it that I know that in October of 2023, governments of the world agreed that we were beyond the 2C Rubicon? And so we're still trying to stick with the Paris Agreement of 1.5 degrees?
Yeah, that we're
So,
supposed to believe this December 2023 update. If this said December 2013, maybe we were still at 1.3 degrees then. But to your point, for the last few years, they've said we're at 2.
yes, at or beyond 2. So let's at least try to be honest about it.
Right. Here's another chart, same organization, and now they're doing this again. These charts go into the future where they're showing us historical emissions, and they're showing us, again, if it's, they call it policies and action. I mean, if it's business, they should just call it business as usual. And again, their business as usual looks like it will decline somehow automatically. I don't understand why. And then targets, pledges and targets, optimistic scenario. And the fourth scenario they haven't even talked about, which is the 1.5 degrees Celsius compatible scenario. And where they're pointing out that we have a gap,
Yeah,
Guy, a
we certainly
2030,
do.
a 2030 target gap. Big exclamation point. We have to do something by 2030, which is in, let's see, just 2 years after the new Donald Trump administration. Maybe if we start really fast after he ruins things further, we can get this done between 2028 and 2030.
I wouldn't hold my breath.
I mean, it's adorable and quaint that the well intentioned environmentalists are publishing such charts.
And it's also dishonest.
It's dishonest as well, but they must believe it. I assume they're not publishing it knowing it's a lie. That would be terrible.
Yes. Yes. So let's assume that they are not purposely lying, that they just are poor researchers.
Right. And in this one, we should already be accelerating downward on such a rapid scale to meet the 1.5-degree Paris Agreement compatible target that current policies at best will have us kind of level to where we are now, I guess we're supposed to believe, even as we in previous sessions have talked about how all of our demands are increasing. I mean, yes, renewables are increasing a little bit every year, but our demands are increasing a lot bit every year. You just do the math. None of our demands are going in the right direction, in line with this. I have to just say this is well-intentioned horse doodle.
Yes, that sounds about right.
But don't take if you won't take it from BP, after all, they're an oil company, and you won't take it from the climateactiontracker.org, let's go to the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, and see what they say. And this is their World Energy Transition Outlook for 2023. The energy transition is off track. The aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic and ripple effects of the Ukraine crisis have further compounded the challenges facing the transition. The stakes could not be higher. Every fraction of a degree in global temperature change can trigger significant and far-reaching consequences for natural systems, human societies, and economies. Can't disagree with that. Limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius requires cutting carbon dioxide emissions by about 37 gigatons and achieving net zero emissions in the energy sector by 2050. IRENA is restating these goals. It says then current pledges and plans fall well short of IRENA's 1.5C pathway and will result in an emissions gap of 16 gigatons in 2050. Annual deployment of some 1,000 gigawatts of renewable power is needed to stay on the 1.5 degree pathway. The share of renewable energy in the energy mix would need to increase from 16% in 2020 to 77% by 2050.
That is absolutely huge. Are you kidding me?
I think it's even more, Guy, because we've reviewed, which no one seems to have done. We reviewed those very complicated Sankey diagrams of our energy use in the United States. And the energy use in all of the developed countries is equally complicated. The amount of electrification, this trends, it's all dependent on a transition, a massive transition to electrification for everything, for every possible transportation use, for every home appliance, all of it. And some of it you and I know just won't. The trucks that are needed to maintain the electrical lines, nobody's saying that large trucks are going to be 100% electric anytime soon. Diesel is going to be a factor. You start picking around the edges, but the main thing is there is no plan to multiply the electric grid by fourfold, which is what that previous segment that we did said would be necessary. And there's no plan to have the amount of electric power production from renewable or non-fossil sources when we've said people are against nuclear and people are against expanding hydro. And in fact, we've reached the limit. To your point, there aren't any more major rivers. We've dammed most of them, and no one wants to dam the remaining ones. So
Right.
where will it come from? Will it all come from wind, solar? There's some people talking about geothermal will be the answer, but geothermal is still a niche technology.
Yes, and it works great in some places like Norway and Iceland, where there's a lot of hot water underground easily tapped into. Beyond that, I don't think we're going to go into Yellowstone and tap into the geysers so that we can reduce our electricity consumption.
I don't either.
It's a tough future ahead of us, and Posting fantasy graphs are not helping.
We're going to wrap this up by just looking with some cold-eyed realism at the situation. We're looking at a graph of CO2 emissions with the dates of the World Climate Conference, COP1, and the COP28. So from COP1 to COP28, what have we done? It's rocketed up. You could be encouraged by this little blip down, but again, that is the Great Recession.
Wait, that wasn't COP25?
Nope. Nobody decided to have that. That was the effect of a global recession, 2008, 2009, 2010. And I think this little blip here is the recession of 2000 to 2002, the dot-com bust. So we need some more busts. We need the whole thing to go bust if we're going to get back down to where it was in 1918 even.
Right.
I don't think anyone would want the kind of life they're going to have to lead if we were to take it back down to 1918.
There's going to be a lot of hungry people.
I think the steampunk, if you go to a Grateful Dead concert or other concerts, you meet this tiny group of people called steampunk people they like the aesthetic of that age that came to a close around 1918, the oil age. Maybe they would be okay. And the Amish, of course, would be completely unaffected by that, as we talked
Right.
about.
Right. But the Amish and the Mennonites are still having way too many children.
So this is emissions and what we've done. And this, again, is measured CO2. And it just is marching up. We can have all these agreements and these protocols. The World Meteorological Conference on Climate Change way back in the 70s. The Hansen testimony to Congress that you were talking about. He's now becoming an old man. Pretty soon he's going to be retired.
Yeah, this doesn't look good. If the curve was pointed the other way and had these same labels, then we could feel good about this, couldn't we?
We could. So we find, as we close this episode, I remind people that here is where we are in significant human history. From 6,000 years ago, we were in the agricultural age that was powered at that time by human muscle, whether of non-slaves or slave humans or animal slaves. Firewood was sustainable and self-limiting. We deforested most of Europe for firewood, for wood burning, for steel, to use it for everything. The Romans used too much wood for coinage, minting coinage, apparently. At around 1600, 1700, coal began to be used at scale, other than firewood. And we have a carbon pulse in which we are either, depending on what religion you are, we're either still on the upslope going up or we're already on the downslope. But something like a post-carbon zero emission future is ahead of us. We just don't know how we're going to get there, which of many forces are going to take us there. Thoughts, Guy, as we bring this to a close?
Again, we have a difficult future ahead of us. This post-carbon future that I hear about all the time is either fantasy or meaning it's not going to happen in any way that we recognize the set of living arrangements, or it's going to cause such disaster all along the way that there will be no recording of it. It'll be, as Albert Einstein talked about World War III and World War IV. He indicated that World War III, he didn't know what would cause that and what weapons would be used, but World War IV would be fought with sticks and stones.
I would put $100 Benjamin on that for sure.
And if you're excited to see that world, well, knock yourself out. I'm not.
Mm. All right, sir. We've gone through a lot today.
A walk in the park.
A walk in the park. All right, folks, that's enough for today.